right to life champion, his name isn't coming to mind, he led an opposition to the leadership and said, we're voting against this bill, and it went down. And so it saved us for that term. The Republicans didn't even want to bring it up in the next session of Congress, 03 to 04, because they couldn't untie that knot. The 2004 election, November, we lost a filibuster-proof minority in the Senate, we, the Democrats, that were our supporters. And at that point, we knew we couldn't hold that Schumer amendment in the bill. And so early in 05, the bill passed.
So what did you do once the bill passed? What did not NACBA do, I should say?
Well, that was probably the most significant thing we have done. And I think Norma gets the lead, and we talked as a board about we were familiar enough, our group of NACBA board members was well familiar with all the provisions by then. But most of the country, they were going to go from day to night. And this new bill changed virtually everything that a consumer bankruptcy lawyer would do.
And our concern was that people, the current bankruptcy debtors' attorneys would just give up, and that they would go into some other area of the law and they would just abandon it. And that was our fear. And if that happens, then of course the banks won.
And in fact, we ended up feeling, because the banks ended up having to moderate a lot of the most onerous provisions during the time we
whittled it
were
away,
fighting.
so that what wound up passing is not anywhere near as bad.
I'll give you an example that brings it home. The first version of the bill said that if a debtor did a Chapter 13, they had to pay their unsecured debts first, like credit card debt would go ahead of child support.
Yeah.
And that was the version they put forward.
Well, that was fine. Oh, we can go into that at some other point. But
no, what I'm saying is, by the time it was finished, most of the increased payments that they were expected had come out of the bill. And
Right.
the version that passed wasn't really going to change the dynamics about collection of dollars.
So
it was just going to make the bankruptcy law not work.
So we knew that the bill was going to pass like in March. It didn't actually until later, but we knew it was going to pass. We knew what it was going to pass with. And we had our convention in San Diego in 2005 in, I don't know, May or at the end of April. So we had to then restructure a lot of our sessions, which had already been set. And we killed a couple of them to put for real sessions in about the bill. And then I personally, Rich Levin was so great. He gave us a marked up copy of the code, lined out and bold and all that kind of stuff, so we could tell what the code really said, the whole code.
Rich Levin was a prominent member of the NBC, National Bankruptcy Conference.
Yeah. And he was going to be a speaker in San
established
Diego.
lawyer in the LA area.
And one of the original authors
Yes.
of the 1978 bankruptcy code.
Yes, great guy. Anyway, so I took that copy of the code and I just spent hours and hours and hours and hours. I took pieces out of it that applied to particular sessions. So we had a session on whatever it is. I would take the parts of the code that were being changed, and that would be part of the materials for that session, so that they would talk about those changes. And then we, at the same time, realized that we needed to put on workshops. We figured one workshop, a 2-day workshop, to invite our members to specifically learn how to practice under the new law. So we set that up for Chicago at the end of July, and we sold out almost immediately. So then we set up a second one in Orlando in September. And between the two, I think we had about 3,500 attendees.
Which was gigantic for your organization at that time.
Not only that, we made, because our group's membership in the late 90s sort of plateaued at about 12 to 1,400. And we were spending all of our resources not in recruiting, fighting the bill. And we just stayed at about the 13, 1,400 mark. About when the bill passed in 05, we were still there. The bill passed, we said, anybody who comes to this conference, they need to join NACBA. Our membership became 3,500 that summer.
Yeah.
Because there was widespread despair when that bill passed, because they had heard people in the bankruptcy world, and I think a lot of the judges were dreading it too, frankly, that they were going to have to relearn everything they knew about consumer bankruptcy. Everyone.
Right.
And our goal was, as Norma said, to keep people in the practice, to not give up. We found what we felt were a lot of openings in this new law to maneuver, to work with, to make consumer bankruptcy still be effective for our clients. Mm-hmm. And our job was, one, to convince other people to stay in the practice around the country, and two, use these seminars to educate them when it's adopted, because the new law had a 6-month delay. So everybody had 6 months to gear up. And
It wasn't going to go into effect until October 17th, I guess. Yeah.
So there was 6 months to prepare. And so at those seminars that we had that summer, we gave them pathways. This is what you need to do when this bill takes effect. These are first orders that you should have your judges adopt to make a lot of the dysfunctional aspects of it addressed, so that you could, you have to put bank deposits with the court clerk. Things were written in there that made no sense to anyone. But beyond that.
Yeah, so Ike and Hank Hildebrand, who has been a longtime member.
Chapter 13 trustee from Nashville.
Right, but also a longtime member of NACBA.
He was an original member. He was in Asheville.
Yeah, great guy. And he worked with Ike and I, the three of us essentially did the Chapter 13 portion of that, the workshop, which was probably, well, of course, maybe I'm prejudiced, but I think it was the more important part. Well, but the first day was Chapter 7 and the rest of the stuff.
Well, there were the whole issues where now your exemptions were going to change based on where you lived a couple of years ago. I mean, they turned everything upside down. Most lawyers hadn't followed these legislative changes closely. They all had to. They heard it was going to be bad, and now they were getting the details. And it ended up being maybe one of the most significant things that NACBA's ever done.
I think so.
Is give people a reason to stay in practice, and then they did survive.
So it wasn't long after the bill passed that the Great Recession hit. It was 2000. It started really with the housing crunch in end of 2006, going into 7, and really took hold in 08 and going forward. What was NACBA's role, or what did you try to do? Was that something that you discussed and dealt with?
Absolutely. I think those of us that were doing bankruptcy law, not just NACBA members, anybody doing consumer bankruptcy, started seeing people coming into their offices with houses they bought, and they never had enough income. They could never afford a house. And then, of course, they're behind, and we got a Chapter 13 case. They can't make those payments.
They had crazy loans that, the interest rate would change every month, and nobody knew what the payments were supposed to be.
There were teaser rates. All of the abuses that led up to the housing bubble bursting, we were like canaries. Our clients were. They were manifesting these issues, and where we had gone years with not seeing this kind of mortgage lending, all of a sudden everything looked crazy. Mm-hmm. And pretty soon it was widely known that the banks had done this, and then the crash hit. And I think from a bankruptcy practice standpoint, filings skyrocketed, because so many people now had mortgage problems, and we were trying to figure out different ways to fix them. Mm-hmm. Early on, in '97, NACBA and the National Consumer Law Center and the Center for Responsible Lending, CRL, got together.
You mean 2007?
2007, I'm sorry. Yes, 2007. We realized we can't help a lot of these people unless we get the ability to cram down mortgages, do a judicial modification in bankruptcy for first mortgages where the property value plummeted. And it would be in the interest of the banks at the end of the day, because otherwise they're just going to get foreclosures and get less than value back. So our group worked with those groups to come up with a proposal, and we found champions in the House. Zoe Lofgren, a congresswoman who succeeded Don Edwards when he retired, and has taken a very strong interest in consumer bankruptcy during her tenure, is now one of the senior Democrats on Judiciary. She agreed to be our champion. She recruited other people in Congress to support this. Zoe, from her position as not only the senior Dem on Judiciary, she happened to be the chair of the Democratic Caucus from California, which was the largest caucus of any state. So she had ready-made ability to talk to and was respected by her California colleagues. She found members of Congress from other parts of the country who represented different constituencies. There was a very effective member from the Blue Dog constituencies from Georgia, Jim, I'm trying to think of his. She assembled a coalition within the Democrats to support our bill. The bill, we knew Bush would veto it anyway, so it was still in the formative stages. By 2009, we had a new president, and we were ready to get this judicial modification through. We tried to meet with, we had a meeting of NACBA's legislative committee in Washington mid-November, right after the November election of '08. And we had 3 pages of proposals that we were going to then go through on consumer bankruptcy, using the fact that people were in economic crisis, members should be hearing about it, fixing the mortgage issue, and a whole lot of other things. And we never found a recipient on the other side once President Obama took office. So Lofgren did get that bill through the House in March of 2009, which would have enabled debtors to reduce their mortgage debt on their mortgages on
Their
house.
first mortgages,
Their
which was
first
the real
mortgage.
key.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because there was already the ability, based upon an interpretation of a Supreme Court case, to modify second mortgages in Chapter 13 if they were totally underwater.
Yes.
Right.
But the real problem was that many times it was the first mortgage that was the elephant in the room.
By
Right.
the time
Right.
of the housing bubble crisis, that was the real problem.
Right.
That was a huge problem, and we couldn't. Millions of people were going to face losing their home.
Right.
Some of them would lose their home no matter what, but a whole lot of them, if we could modify the mortgage, these would be homes that could be saved. So the House passed it, went to the Senate. Dick Durbin was the lead sponsor there. End of the day, the bill was, we needed 60 votes to defeat to enact cloture, and it got 45. So the bill died.
And let's be real here. The unfortunate thing is that President Obama refused to lift a finger to help, whereas he came out indicating that he was in support of this concept prior to the election, and even was mentioned by Biden in one of the debates. He basically did everything he could to make sure it never came into effect.
Well, the whole team of economic advisors in the new administration turned out to be not friendly to homeowners.
They're just
They
banking
appointed
guys.
Tim Geithner from the New York Fed to be Secretary of Treasury. Larry Summers was one of the top economic advisors. NACBA made many efforts to try to go meet with the president's staff. We had been
Nothing.
successful during the Clinton administration in getting to people. We met with the council, some of the top National Economic Council advisors, staff over those years. Never got to first base.
And of course, then they passed the bill that allowed homeowners, or that required the banks to allow certain numbers of homeowners to refinance their mortgages. But I was still on the bench when I looked at the Treasury regulations on that.
Right.
And there were like pages and pages and pages to wade through to try to figure out what it was that were the actual requirements of the bill, if any.
And bankruptcy debtors were excluded from that.
And most of those,
They didn't qualify.
Most of those programs, if not all of them, required the debtor to be current on their loans. So people needing bankruptcy,
Right.
these are people that have been struggling. So we had virtually no impact.
Very illusory
And there
benefits.
was an argument that was made at that time, at the time this was going on, that if they had just tweaked the Chapter 13 provisions to allow the modification of first mortgages, you would have had the same effect that you had when the Congress passed Chapter 12. Suddenly, you wouldn't have a farm bankruptcy problem anymore because everybody would negotiate the problem away.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
There would have been an incentive for
Right.
the banks to work
And
with people.
instead, we're still going through it.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Okay. Let's move on to, because we're about out of
Yeah,
time.
right.
Who are the leaders of NACBA today?
Well, today, the president of NACBA is Ed Boltz, who's been active for about 15
And he's from?
He's in Durham, North Carolina. The vice president is
Boltz is B-O-L-T-Z.
Vice President is Jim Haller from Southern Illinois, the St. Louis suburb area. The secretary is John Caldwell from San Diego, C-O-L-W-E-L-L. I'm still the treasurer. When I left the president's job, since Norma and I for the first several years were the administrators, we didn't have a full-time staff, she became president and I took over as treasurer. So I've stayed on as treasurer since then. The rest of the board right now includes Tara Toomey.
Twomey.
She's now in Carmel, California, nice location. We have Carol Collier-Smith from the suburbs of Atlanta. We have
Colliersmith.
yes, Eugene Melchione from Waterbury, Connecticut.
Melchionne.
Dan Press from the D.C., Virginia area. I'm trying to think if I'm leaving out somebody.
How many members do you have now?
We have about 3,000 right now. We peaked out at about 5,000 at the height of the filings. So filings after the bubble crashed in 2008, the bankruptcy filings continued to escalate all the way through 2010, where there were record numbers.
And how many people came to your, well, it wouldn't be members now, came to your last NACBA convention?
Well, our last NACBA convention, we had about 660. But at the peak, we were here in San Francisco in 2010, we had 1,500 members come. Because bankruptcy business was booming.
Which it is not now, so a lot of our members don't have the money to come to
So
a
our membership
convention.
was at about 5,000, we had about 1,500 people here.
So what do you view as NACBA's biggest achievements?
Well, I think we started off with 3 goals, which were to be active in legislation, in court litigation, and educating and elevating the bar. And it's been reduced by our current executive director, Dan LeBert. He used advocate, educate, litigate. And I think in all 3 of those areas, we have made a mark and will need to continue to make a mark. We haven't talked that much about court cases. Just to add to our discussion, NACBA has been involved in numerous Supreme Court cases and appellate court cases at the circuit level and below over our entire existence, starting with that Pladsen case. But we've had positive results in some of them where the courts have adopted our view. Others we've lost outright. Many we didn't prevail entirely, but we affected the ultimate decision enough so that the result was livable.
And that our real intent was to prevent more damage from being done in the decision.
As you
we,
would know,
we did accomplish.
A lot of these cases were not brought by NACBA or by NACBA members, but you find yourself seeing a case going up with terrible facts. This is going to make terrible law.
Maybe a terrible attorney advocating.
Yes, frequently so.
So our role a lot has been to go in with amicus briefs to give the best arguments we could to influence the ultimate decision. And we've had a big impact in that area.
Right.
So has been NACBA's biggest disappointment to this point? Was it the 2005 legislation?
No, I think that really that was inevitable. And I think by the time it got passed, we had made enough improvements in it that it was nowhere near as bad as it started off. You may not agree with me. My biggest disappointment from NACBA's standpoint is the last 8 years of the administration, which was an administration that had so much promise and that could have done so much to help the people that we live with every day. And they failed to do it.
Well, I think I'd couch it not on any particular event, but what I see the dynamics at work. We do have a national group. It's still a modest group. We can't compete with the bankers and the financial services industry at any level, whether it's at the national level or at the California level,
Right.
where state exemptions.
Right.
We had an NACBA-sponsored bill that just went down 2 days ago.
Yeah.
At the final passage level, the bankers came in with heavy
Banks.
lobby.
It's all the banks.
What's disappointing is the fact that our clients and our members, we're still behind the 8 ball in being able to effectively compete in public policy.
Yeah, that's true.
It doesn't matter how right our cause is, or how many good facts we have, or how many neutral people will speak on our behalf. Big money is still unfortunately
Yeah.
much too influential in the outcomes. That's it's not a disappointment so much for NACBA as it's for our country.
Yeah, right. And that does actually, that is another way of saying what I was saying, which is we all hope, I certainly hoped that President Obama was not going to be so heavily influenced by the banks. But the fact of the matter is that was what happened.
Do you think NACBA's mission now is different going forward than it was before, or do you think the mission is the same?
Well, I think in those broad categories, there are a lot of new members that come into bankruptcy practice, and I think we play an important role in giving them these educational programs, and give them top speakers on various topics. We also are a tool that people who want to try to organize, because Congress is so dysfunctional today, NACBA has been successful in other states recently. Our Oregon attorneys a couple of years ago got through some big changes in the Oregon exemptions using NACBA as the base. Ohio, it happened the same thing a few years before. Even with Republican legislature, they were able to get it. So it's there as a support platform for individual members to take the ball and run, and we can give them some support in that area. The court cases, there's always going to be a need for a group to come in with effective briefs to argue cases that could have national, if not circuit, impact on the rights of consumers all over the country. There's nobody else that's positioned to do that, really.
Anything I forgot to ask you?
Well, yeah, I don't think you forgot to ask it, but I'll say that it's been a real joy to have participated in the formation and course that NACBA's been on. And despite the amount of time that I think each of us and our colleagues have put into it, I would have never had it any different.
That's true. That's true. I think I mentioned I was a little bit bored with bankruptcy, turning the corner around 1990 or so. But, this really made it all so interesting for me again. And so I'm really glad, Ike, that you stayed after me and convinced me to help, because it really has changed my life as well.
And at a personal level, we've gotten a chance to meet some of
Right.
not just the best bankruptcy lawyers around the country, but some of the best people.
Right.
And our paths wouldn't have crossed without this. And that continues to be true of our entire membership.
Yeah.
They meet people with similar inklings every year at our convention, and they stay friends for decades. And it's been a very positive thing.
So, and I want to thank you, really, for doing these oral histories. They're so valuable. I mean, I heard, I don't even know, can you hear the recordings on the internet anymore?
Yes, oh yes.
They are there, because I saw some of the transcripts now.
Sometimes they're hard to find. I don't know why it takes so much sometimes, but yes.